developed in 1984. Marvelous year, a few different things happening then, but yeah, one of them is the Sony WM-F15, F15 to be precise. Nice little square unit, one of my favourite models of all time. Sort of been collecting them slowly over the years. You can see here from the catalogue. I don't know if they're that expensive, but they came in grey, blue and red, as you can see here. And also you can optionally get a little bag to go with it as well. I have one of these little bags. Specs sheets here, you can have a read through that. Well, here are the units. These are basically mechanically pretty much the same unit. We have, of course, the WM-F15 and the WM-F65. And really the only difference is the recording functionality. So common things to go wrong with these units, apart from of course this belts that turn to, you know, molasses inside of the machine. These are really hard to clean when that happens. The headphone socket, just easier if I do this, but there's this plastic ring that holds this metal sleeve in for the headphone jack. The plastic on this outside here cracks, it gets a hairline fracture in it, and when that happens this little bit of plastic pops out, and that has happened to this one. So what I've done is, since the recording input gets less run or use time, I've stolen one off another unit and fitted it into this one. What else happens? The auto stop mechanism. Basically what will happen is you will run the unit, you'll play it, and then it will just stop after a couple of seconds. So that's basically just, there's a spring, which I'll show you basically, that runs in the inside of here, behind the capstan shaft, and that doesn't hold tension on the little plastic gear that runs inside. And what happens is it falls into its little groove for the auto stop, and then it'll just engage it, and then that will click the player off. There's a fix that I'm going to try on one of my other units. We have quite a few of these to repair. So yeah, let's get started with some of the things you'll need. Well, for instance, screwdrivers. Small flathead is useful, as well as a really fine tip, because of my zoom here, but basically this is very fine Phillips, and that is used mainly to adjust the head positioning, which you don't normally have to do. I do it because quite often after 30 years, remember these things are like, well, actually more than 30 years old now. Yeah, so I use this screwdriver mainly here. It's a bit bigger. That's another Phillips. It's magnetic tip. Magnetic tips on screwdrivers and these, you know, any bit of cassette analog equipment is generally not a good idea, but the screws are so small, and if you lose them, yeah, that's a problem. We've also got some tweezers. This is basically to help fit any belts. We have a cassette, which I've just recorded some audio from Epidemic Sound. I've also got this little contraption here. This is just basically a battery with a switch wired to the correct size for the DC input. So I can run the Walkman without having to put the batteries in, because in order to test these you have to have this back cover on, and it's, you know, taking this on and off just to test, you know, to see if your repair worked is a pain in the ass. The other thing I've got is some belts. These are new belts from fixyouraudio.com. I've used them for a few years. These are pretty good belts actually. Problem with old or new old stock belts is, you know, rubber gets perished and things like that. These two, as I said, are definitely very similar in terms of mechanics. I don't have one open to compare it, but you can see even on here what other ones this supports. So right, The other thing you'll need is a soldering iron and the patience of a saint, because these things are crap to take apart. But either or, we'll get started and I'll show you what the problem is with this one. So what we'll do is we'll plug it in. I'm going to run the audio feed into the camera directly so you can hear what it sounds like, and then yeah, we'll go from there. So that basically just shows it's a very common issue with any bit of audio equipment is the volume pots get a bit scratchy, so basically that needs cleaning. Also there's a little bit of wow and flutter, so maybe I'm not expecting much out of these sort of units because you know how old they are, and the pinch rollers and everything get worn out, but basically I think we could try and put a new belt on that and see if that helps. And I think there's one more issue with this, and it's the switches, or sorry, the leaf switches. As you can see there, I'm pressing reverse to try and reverse the unit, and there's either bad contacts or they're badly adjusted. So yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll take this apart and give it a cleaning, switch a belt, fix the volume pot, and just see how we go. Okay, so taking one of these units is pretty easy, so, well, easy compared to some. So there are 3 screws along the bottom half. These 3 are for the door, down here. So 1, 2, 3 for the door, 3 for the back. There's also 4 on the back, and that is the hinge screw, and that is for the bezel. So we'll start with just taking off the battery cover. There's also a bit of foam in here. That's to help keep the batteries shifting around. It's probably not a bad idea to replace it if you can. But what I'm going to do is just start by removing the 4 screws. The other thing that might be quite useful is to get like a container or something to put screws into and parts. That way you don't lose them, because these screws are quite tiny. It also helps keep just to keep things organized, so yeah. Alright, so I'm just going to carry on taking out the 4 screws on the back. This is where the flathead screwdriver really comes handy, just because you can pick the screws up, get them out. Also make sure you pick a screwdriver that fits the screws, because you don't want to strip them out. They can get seized in place. And don't worry, like this one here, I couldn't get it out with the magnet. That's not a problem. As long as it's loose, you can generally just pull the back cover off with them in place. Some of them you can coax by flipping the unit over. And now the 3 screws just along the back here. Be interesting to see what's in there. Okay, so now with these 3 out, these 4 out, don't worry about that one, it normally gets stuck. You can just sort of pop it apart like that. There we go. And yeah, sometimes this one here will come out. If not, just give it a few turns while you're lifting it, and then there you go. So I like to keep all the bits together. Alright, so now that we're in the unit, we have these wires here, which are dreadful to take apart. These ones always break through here when you lift the board out, so that's where the soldering iron comes in handy. Also, half of your LEDs and wires for your head assembly go through here. these wires I like to break too, just because they are very thin and don't like to be moved. These are actually pretty easy to take apart, so what I'm going to do is just get rid of this bit of foam, being very careful not to rip the wires off it, and pull back. It's very important not just to rip that off like a band-aid, just because you'll take the wires with it. Another thing I like to do is take photos. I'll link a service manual to this model in the description, but yeah, I take photos typically as I go, which I've reminded myself I should do. So if you need to take this plastic bezel off, there's a screw here and there's one here. These are different lengths, only one will go in. This is the longest one, so I'll start with that next to the headphone jack, because you can only use the one screw. But we don't need to do that. You only need to do that if you need to take some of the head components or more of the flywheels and drive assembly out. But yeah, belts and things, it's just really this top board. So what I'm going to do is hinge it out from this tuning knob, so I can tilt the back side of the board up, gently just coax it out. It's sort of like a slight wiggle slash push on the top, and then the board just pops out. And at this point you can just flip the board over like that. It's really handy to have something to sort of press this up. Yeah. Alright, now that we're inside, I'll show you some of the things inside of this model. Okay, I'm going to try and do this left-handed because I'm holding the board up with my right hand while trying to film. So of course this is the belt. It goes around the, it's like a pendulum sort of gear. This does your reverse and your forwards. You can see it tilting there as I press the buttons. So that engages the speed for that, and these leaf switches. And I believe these are the ones we're having problems with. So you can see either they're not adjusted quite right, so they're not engaging this little white plastic gear up and down properly, or they're dirty. So I'll inspect that closer. And this is your main capstan drive. On another few other models I'll show you how this all works, but I'll keep this one pretty light. And this has a leaf spring down here which detects the take-up spool hub and things like that. Your auto stop mechanism lives under this main capstan drive. I have a spare one somewhere in my parts collection, but basically it's a plastic gear, and I'll point that out on some other repairs because I've got a few other models to fix. But for right now, what I'll do is we'll look at this belt, look at these forward and reverse leaf spring contacts and placement, and also on the underside here is your volume knob, which has a Phillips screw which you can take off and then clean the pot inside there. Okay, so after analysing this just a little bit, what I think is happening is these spring contacts aren't making it, being moved enough. You can see that basically it's not engaging it. So the forward direction, you can see them all sort of move up there. That is good engagement, but reverse here, it's not really pushing them down. So I think we just need to loosen these two screws and adjust the placement of the leaf spring. So I'm going to do that now. Alright, so I've held the board out with a coffee cup just because I don't have any other sort of way of holding that. That's not the correct tool. So what I'm going to do is just make sure none of the switches are engaged, loosen the two screws, and you can see this has a little bit more movement. See them wiggling. So what we'll do is check one side, check the other. think that might be it there. So what I'm going to do is just sort of lightly tighten these screws down. You don't have to go too tight on these just because it's a very thin PCB. And then we'll try it out. This is where this little battery pack comes in handy, just because you can test stuff out without having to reassemble the whole thing in order to get the battery contacts on the back cover in there, which is this and that. Okay, so I just turned those leaf springs around a wee bit and see how we go. Forward direction, good. What about reverse? That's looking really good. So I didn't move it by much, but basically just lined it up a bit more so it works a bit easier. Alright, so I'm going to tackle the second easiest job, is the belt. So bring my coffee cup holder back over. You want to avoid moving the circuit board around too much, just because these wires, they get weak every time you flop it back and forth. So if you can hold it steady, that's preferable. And these guys I didn't need to move. So the belt is pretty easy, so all we need to do is lift it off the main what do you want to call it, thingy, and then lift the belt off the motor. These are a magnetic motor, which is really cool because they're really thin. That's how some of those, like I think it's the same technology used in the world's smallest Walkman by Sony. That's how they got that, and heaps of others as well. It's a good indication if those hubs are silver. So there's the belt. So all I need to do is get my new belt out of my bag. I'm just going to look at it compared to the other one. To be honest, I think that's also a new belt that I put in there, but it's a little smaller in terms of diameter, so it might give a bit more tension and torque, might reduce some of that wound flutter. And the way I do this is I get it sort of pinched like that, and then I actually put it down, use my tweezers to sort of poke it through the little shield for the motor race, the belt race, so it doesn't, I think this is just like a shield so the belt doesn't go or get stuck in anything, but, and also for the motor, sorry. And you'll see it sort of poking out the other side, so all you need to do is get it through just enough. Actually, I'm going to zoom in a bit. Just enough to where you can get it on the other side. There we go. And I just pull it, and then I take my left finger and just place it on the motor like that, so it seats, and then I use my other finger or tweezers, however you want to do it, to just sort of roll it over like that. And these are a square belt, so they'll, you know, do their thing, and then just use it to pop it over the other drive gear, and then give it a few turns. Feels good. Good tension. Yep. That's how that works. Cool. Alright, I'll try it out, make sure. Well, actually what I'll do is clean the knob on the volume control next. And because I'm a big old numpty, I forgot to hit record on the camera. But basically you just take that screw that I showed just before out, take the knob out, put some cleaner in there, put the screw back in, and you're good to go. But yeah, you want to avoid spraying too much into this just in case it gets on the belt or anything, but I'm just going to work that in just a wee bit. And yeah, there's your radio switch cleaned, headphone output cleaned, and your volume knob, which looks like I got correct. Perfect. Alright, we'll try this thing out and see how it sounds. Cool, so a little bit scratchy but not too bad. Sounds pretty good considering the tape I'm using is also ancient and worn. I recorded this on that new Denon DRM-750 40 whatever it is with Dolby C. So yeah, now that the unit is effectively working, we'll just go ahead and put it back together. The only thing is to make sure that all these little wires are out of the way of the battery, which means just putting on all that, special foam tape, and the unit is pretty much good to be reassembled. So we'll go ahead and we'll start putting this back together now. You can stick a flathead screwdriver down into this hole, just a really fine one, and that is your speed adjustment. Cool. What I'll do is I'll steal my batteries out of this, put them in the unit, give it a final test. And put a tape in it and double check it. Well, that was a pretty easy one to fix. Just did a belt, did the volume pot, fixed the reverse switches and things like that. I'm going to mix in the closing out music from the Walkman itself so you can hear it. But yeah, basically it's a pretty nice little unit. There's also, this is where your belt clip goes, it slots on like that. I have more of these units that I'm going to be fixing up, so I'll show more of that off later, but yeah, I'm really happy with how that turned out, and it's actually a really nice condition model with its little Sony thing there, and yeah, it's just a pleasing square box all around. I really like these units. They're a little bit picky with tapes and things like that, the quality of tape that you use and stuff, but overall they're they're simple but really nice units. The only other thing that you could probably do with these is swap capacitors out, and things like that, which I may do on one unit just to see if I get any improved performance, but as you can see, that's going to be quite a project on something this small, so it's not something that I'm going to tend to do that often. But yeah, either or, hopefully this was useful, and just sort of a bit of a look into one of my favourite models. Yeah, and as I said, there's a service manual in the description if anyone needs it. Alrighty guys, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.